go.
Okay, it's up in my window now.
Okay. All right. So good morning, everybody. My name is Stephanie Rodriguez. I'm a LMT based in Phoenix, Arizona, and the founder of the United States Organization of Licensed Massage Therapists, or USO LMT. Through our work here, we've developed an advocacy program for massage therapists in the United States. So good morning, everybody. My name is Stephanie Rodriguez. I'm a LMT based in Arizona, and all right.
Okay. Something's happening with my sound, so I'm getting two sounds.
Yeah, I was getting that too. I think I've got it now.
Okay. Well, I paused mine and I don't know how to, oh, I got to turn off the sound here. There we go. Okay. Now I know this better.
All right. So I think we're good. So through our work here with USO LMT, we've developed an advocacy program for massage therapists in the United States, and we're working to fulfill our mission, which is to unify, advocate for, and educate massage therapists about the issues that matter to them. So we're looking to unify massage therapists around their passions for industry-wide change and to dive into the major issues that affect massage therapists today. And then form committees with the purpose of finding and advancing solutions to these problems. So this month is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and that's where we're going to form our first focus group of the year. So I'm going to turn it over to Deb so she can introduce herself.
Okay. Hi, I'm Deb Kimmet, and I am the founder and executive director of the LMT Body Politic. And Stephanie and I have been working together on different issues, and this is one of the issues that we wanted to collaborate on. And I am, that's my background, or that's the organization that I am working on. It's a political advocacy group, and human trafficking is one of the issues that we're working on. In terms of my governmental background, I actually started massage back in 1987, and started doing political advocacy for massage therapy in '89. So I've been at it for a long time. I actually co-wrote the statutes for my state's practice act. I helped write the rules. I also served on the board of massage for my state, was a delegate to the FSMTB, and also was chair of the massage therapy board for a couple of years. So I've been very active politically, and this is just one of the issues that we're working on. So back to you, Stephanie.
All right. Get this pulled back up. So in August of last year, I got a chance to meet with the Strategic Initiatives Director of the Polaris Project. Now, if you don't know what the Polaris Project is, they were founded in 2002. They're a national organization that serves the victims and survivors of human trafficking through their National Human Trafficking Hotline. They collect data on how human trafficking works in the United States. And they're an influencer in the federal, state, and local policies, and they're working to disrupt human trafficking. So they've produced multiple reports that are on their website that you can go to and download about human trafficking. The one that we're going to talk about today is the Human Trafficking in Illicit Massage Businesses report. And they've also worked with the Federation of State Massage Therapy Boards on their Human Trafficking Task Force report, which was released in 2017. And then I was happy to meet with Robert Beiser in August of last year to kind of talk about what's going on currently with human trafficking and massage, and how we might be able to work together through USO LMT. So I kind of want to talk about that a little bit and what we were discussing. So the first thing was reporting human trafficking. And Polaris told me to report all suspected or known illegal brothels that are disguised as massage establishments to the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And if you don't have that number, it's 1-888-373-7888. So the reason this hotline exists is because law enforcement is not always the agency in your state that handles trafficking. So there may be specialized forces or different organizations where this information needs to be reported in each state. And sometimes it's difficult to know which agency needs to be reported to. So Polaris told me that one state even has 13 different agencies that they have to report activity to. And it might be a combination of law enforcement, local police, federal agencies, and then task forces working together in your state. So at the hotline, they're prepared to respond and report information to the appropriate agencies in each state. And then we talked a little bit about establishment licensing, which we're going to get into a bit more today. So the reason this came up was that someone that I was working with earlier in the year last year with USO LMT went to the Tucson Massage Establishment Licensing Office in Arizona about changing our classification. So we weren't under the codes or the classification of massage parlor. And when she went to that office, she was told that if we move out of that classification or out of these codes, that it would uncover a huge crime syndicate and that it could be dangerous to our profession. And that was interesting. So I took that to Polaris and I asked them about it. Their view on it was that it shouldn't really cause any problems to our profession to be moved out of that classification. And that, crime syndicates, they have a bigger fish to fry than legitimate massage businesses. They said that these crime syndicates' mission is just to make money. And a lot of times what they do is they'll set up their own massage schools to fit their needs. And then they pay for their therapist verification and their licensing. And then they start their business and then they end up lying about their revenue. And they said that these businesses actually pay taxes at a shocking level of compliance for brothels, and that they jump through all the hoops that they need to work. But then after they get to that point, they don't pay their workers. They also end up donating money to political campaigns to influence their legislature. And they see exploitation as a competitive edge in the marketplace. So we got through that conversation and then we started talking about Arizona specifically because our state introduced license reciprocity last year in January. And Polaris believes that those laws that would allow us to move between states easier would actually cause an increase in brothels moving into our states. And I know that our state boards saw an increase in therapists coming into our state requesting licensing, and they were having more revocations throughout the year because of it. And it may not be all directly related to that particular law, but we did see an increase in illegal massage businesses trying to introduce themselves into our economy last year. So the other thing I want to know about Polaris is that Polaris is really focused on the victims. So when you learn from them and you work with them, you just have to keep in mind that that is the main focus and that they really want to see more massage therapists offer preventative communication, work with anti-trafficking intervention organizations, and coordinate our messaging around how we can get people out of trafficking situations. They told me that if we could get behind their mission, which is to help victims, and then we can contact our news sources and their online channels, that they could multiply that effect and provide talking points to us and help things go viral online. So Polaris is willing to work with us in that way. But the messaging really has to be around helping the victim and not necessarily about separating massage therapists from human trafficking when we work with Polaris. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is they suggested that we contact our state boards and try to get them involved to provide information of what fits the profile of a brothel in our state. And then to have them provide information to massage therapists on the organizations that deal with human trafficking in our states, and to confirm the existence of known brothels. So I know our state board doesn't do that, but we do have a human trafficking council in Arizona that may provide that information to us if we request it. And you may have that in your state too. So I think it's definitely something to check into and see what's being done already. Polaris is also trying to get information translated into the workers' native languages to help them connect with security offices, labor departments, code enforcement, and law enforcement. And they told me whenever we were talking about this to really be careful about racial bias and discrimination when we're reporting incidences or even our suspicion of trafficking, especially as it relates to Asian massage businesses. Not all Asian massage businesses are illegal brothels, and we need to be careful that we don't put them into that category. They suggested that if we see something like this, that we try to engage the people who are working there, because those people are the ones who are most likely to be reported. And instead of having them investigated, to try to notify them in their own language of organizations where they can find economic support, housing services, and get stable due to the fact that they've been forced into sexual or labor services in human trafficking. They also said that states spend a lot of money on law enforcement, but they're not really willing to provide housing subsidies, and that's not really effective at getting victims out of the situation, even though they said that it costs less to provide housing subsidies to victims than it is to investigate. So they said to look for state organizations that actually help victims with housing and resources. And then we talked about sexual service sites. So we talked about rub maps a bit, and I'm pretty sure everybody knows what that is. It's a review site where people can go on and review brothels. And so we talked about that and how difficult it is to shut down these types of sites, because the servers on rub maps specifically, they're not in the jurisdiction of the United States. They used to be here, but then they moved them, and I think their new servers are in Sweden. And then the people, if you look into it, the people that are registered to these types of sites, they're only fronts for the organization. So the business is usually fronted by a shell company. There isn't really a strong mechanism to intercede internationally. So like rub maps, there's no legal requirement for third-party consent internationally. So if your business ends up on that list, it is very difficult to have it removed. And they said the best recourse to have it removed would be to try to sue rub maps. They also suggested that other sites like that are great tools for law enforcement, to help them see which businesses are actually operating as brothels. So I feel like they do believe that sites like this should be shut down, but there's another viewpoint to where these sites are actually helpful because this is where the perpetrators are. They also suggested to me that when it comes to law enforcement, they're just really looking for results. And if there are 10 other sites in your area that are advertising brothels that are disguised as massage businesses, it's actually harder to prosecute these cases than it is drugs or stolen cars or anything that's a bit more straightforward, because these cases are very complex. And once a business like this is prosecuted, it'll tend to just move and pop up somewhere else. So that happens quite often, and it's very difficult to pinpoint the owners of these types of businesses. And then we talked a little bit about the Robert Kraft incident in Florida, who was the New England Patriots guy who went to Orchids Day Spa in Florida, and he solicited sex from the women that worked at the spa. So it recently came out that the women working there ended up having to pay huge fines for prostitution. Robert Kraft walked, and he wasn't punished for the whole thing. And the problem with this event is that the whole thing was framed as a human trafficking sting. But in reality, this was really just a brothel that was offering sexual services, and there was no human trafficking going on. And Polaris was involved in creating that narrative. So I want to send this back to Deb so she can talk a little bit about how she feels about Polaris and give us a different viewpoint on the situation, because there's two sides here. There's really the one side of helping the victims, and then we have another issue to talk about, which is how do we separate ourselves from human trafficking? And they're two different things. And I think a lot of people are getting involved with Polaris. They're learning from Polaris. And I'm not saying that anything Polaris is doing is bad. We need to help the victims. But the bigger issue here is how do we separate ourselves, and are we a victim? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ed and let her give her presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. That was great information. Before I get started, one thing I did want to talk about just a little bit is that human trafficking and prostitution are two different things. But prostitution, well, a lot of human trafficking victims are forced into prostitution. And so you'll hear a lot about Polaris wanting to separate the two things from each other. And I just want to acknowledge that for them as well. And Stephanie is right. One of the things that we do need to look at is how we separate ourselves from these businesses. And so one thing that I've done is to make it a little bit more entertaining is that I put together a little video or a slideshow that goes into three topic areas. One is about how we can begin separating ourselves from the issue. But there's some real basic groundwork that we have to set first. The second thing I'll talk about is what kinds of things that we as massage therapists can do. And then the third thing is legal remedies. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and get this video started. And off we go. Oops, I gotta. Okay, so we're going to share that.
I've titled this talk Untangling Massage, Human Trafficking and Prostitution. There are a few basic points that I think are important to talk about so that we can actually begin that process of untangling massage from these illicit activities. And to do that, I want to talk about eagles, plumbers, and pink elephants. It's important to understand what binds them together, and the eagle helps provide the answer: perception. The eagle soars up above everything and can see everything from a bird's eye view. It sees the big picture, which is all about perception. And before we get into what I mean about perception, we have to understand why perception is such a big deal. Addressing human trafficking and prostitution are a legal issue, whether it's done through state or local laws. But to pass those laws, a political process is involved. That means the solution is political. So the perception around the issue is key to understand what we're facing. A case in point has been what's been unfolding in our national politics. We can see it clearly. How you perceive your reality, what's actually real, and what you've been told is real leads you to different conclusions. And that means that perception is framed by the language we use and how we talk about things. Let me give you a clear example. Here's a quote from Polaris about how trafficking in what they call illicit massage parlors is the second highest number of trafficking cases. It sounds like a lot, but how much of the entire human trafficking problem is it? It has to be just under half, right? Nope. How about 20%? Nope. how about try about 6%? So Polaris tells us it's the second highest number of trafficking cases, and that scares the average Joe Public person into believing that we've got to do something about this. But the reality is, it represents only about 6% of all the cases of human trafficking. Both are true, but when you take the numbers in context, it provides a very different picture. And in that context of 6%, wouldn't it make much more sense to tackle the issue of human trafficking generally, rather than singling out the massage therapy profession? This is one reason why the language we use and how we frame the issue is so important, but don't take my word for it. The New Yorker has a great article on names. In it, the research shows that a name sends a signal to others about that person's religion, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and so on. And this in turn can influence how they're treated. The same is true for us too. Language is so important. I mean, we know the terms, massage parlor, illicit massage business. Those names do make a difference because they create a link to the crime and blur the issue between who we are as a profession and the criminal activity that has infiltrated our profession. In essence, in the context of the article, it signals who we are. To give you an example, let's talk plumbers. Here's Joe the plumber. He's part of a theft ring disguised as plumbers. So do we call them a plumbing ring? Do we call them an illicit plumbing business? We don't. It's a theft ring. And while some plumbers might be involved in that crime, the theft ring has very little to do with plumbing. It's just a cover. In our case, an illicit massage business is basically equating massage businesses with crime. And there's no such thing as illicit massage. You're either doing massage or something else. And most of us know how offensive the term massage parlor is. It's a euphemism for a sex business. But again, it creates that link to massage. These names send a signal. Naming the business this way sets up an implicit bias to view the profession through the lens of human trafficking and prostitution, making the profession a part of the problem rather than a healthcare profession that is also a victim of the problem. And part of the process of unlinking massage from human trafficking prostitution is changing our language to stop that signaling, that linking, that massage is about sex. So how do we talk about it? Well, to begin that unlinking, we need to describe it as a criminal activity that is distinct from massage therapy. And this is the first thing that we can do. We can call out language that links massage to these illicit and illegal activities. The simplest way to do that for the term illicit massage business is to go back to our plumber. Tell the person using this language, if a theft ring disguises themselves as plumbers, would you call them a plumbing ring? An illicit plumbing business? They'll get it right away. They'll understand. It's making these connections that are so important. And we need to call these places exactly what they are. They're brothels disguised as massage businesses or B-dams. The term wasn't invented by me. The first time I saw it was on a national human trafficking hotline website. I liked it. I chose it because the acronym is a bit pejorative, which is exactly how we want to characterize these places. But some people will say that the name is too long, so I also use this one, sex parlor. This was coined on the fly by Daniel Zolnikov, a Montana legislator, during a legislative hearing in 2019. We can also clarify some of our other language. For example, because legitimate and illegitimate can have a sexual connotation, I suggest using the legal practice of massage, practicing legally, and other variations like that. And we can say people working illegally. Also, when talking about this, avoid talking about them as therapists or massage practitioners or massage therapists. Use victims, women, men, or use non-binary language like they, them, or people. And instead of illicit massage, we can talk about illicit activity, criminal activity, using massage as a front to perform illegal activity, and so on. See, changing our language creates a separation, because by not separating it from our profession, as I said before, it sends a signal that we are part of the problem, not a victim of the problem. And that, by association, if we're part of the problem, it makes it easy to make us responsible for the problem. And here's what I mean. So let's go back to Joe the plumber so you can see. So we walk into an empty house and we see we've been robbed. And we remember seeing a plumbing truck drive away as we pulled up. So who do we call? Do we call the plumbing board? No, a crime occurred, so we're going to call the police. A politician will understand that analogy very easily. But let's take our analogy a little bit further. Do we have a board put more rules on plumbers? Make them register their trucks and put a GPS tracker on them to track the truck in case it's involved in a crime? Say in their scope of practice that they can't be thieves? And that politician is going to say, don't be ridiculous. They're not plumbers. These people who are doing this are not plumbers. And yet, that is the very approach that's used on us. That as a whole, the profession is being made responsible for the problem when they put those kinds of regulations on us, when they license our establishments for the purpose of trying to stop human trafficking and prostitution. And we're not responsible for criminal activity. Human trafficking and prostitution are societal issues, just as a crime is a societal issue to be dealt with through criminal statutes and through those in our society tasked with solving that problem, meaning law enforcement. But there are a lot of reasons why we're being made responsible. And in addition to the signaling issue, the main one being a lack of political power, because that lack of political power manifests in a variety of ways. And that's a whole different discussion that deserves its own meaning. So I'm going to leave it at that. But it is about the fact that we are disenfranchised and that we lack political power. But by now, you can see how language is so important, that it plays a big role in determining responsibility for the problem of human trafficking and prostitution. As I said, criminal activity like this is a societal problem and should be handled in a societal way, not making a profession responsible for it. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do anything. That's not what I'm saying. I think that there are things that generally apply to our profession that go far beyond human trafficking and prostitution. For example, diploma mills, fraudulent transcripts, those kinds of things are tied to the human trafficking problem, but they also go wider than that. They directly affect how licensees come into our profession. And as gatekeepers for boards, that's a reasonable regulation. Those kinds of general issues are important, and they also help combat BDAMs. If a state wants to regulate establishments for the purposes of hygiene and sanitation practices, that's one thing. But to try to regulate establishments to stop human trafficking and prostitution is another. The moment that you go down that road, then you're regulating the profession as if all the people being regulated are the criminal in need of regulating. And that's where our pink elephant comes in. And what do people say? Don't think about the pink elephant. So I'm showing you the pink elephant. You're seeing the pink elephant. It's right there in front of you, and I'm asking you not to think about it. So what are you thinking about? The pink elephant. Again, this is another way of signaling or linking our profession to this criminal activity. For example, in these typical laws, establishment licensing and so on, is that we see language like massage therapists are prohibited from exposing their genitals. And the general massage therapist out there thinks, this language is okay. I mean, well, I don't expose my genitals, so therefore it's okay. But here's what sex buyers see. LMTs are exposing their genitals. There's that link. That's signaling again. And we see other typical language. 2 years ago, legislators in Montana had language before them that put prohibitions on sex directly in the scope of practice. Some massage therapists rationalized it as, well, I don't massage to arouse people, so it's okay if it's prohibited in my scope of practice. This is problematic because no other profession or occupation has language in their scope of practice, and it demeans the public's perception. Back to that word again, perception of massage as a healthcare profession. And I can give you example after example, but the implication of this language is that there are LMTs out there who are doing this behavior, and that behavior needs to be regulated. No, LMTs are not doing this behavior. Criminals and victims of human traffickers are doing this behavior. But because of the linkage, the association, the signaling, it reflects back on us, and it implies that we are doing the bad behavior. trying to regulate our profession through establishment licensing, instead of separating us from the issue of human trafficking and prostitution, has only enmeshed us in the problem, and it makes us responsible for the problem, and in the process harms us. And we need to stop harming massage therapists with bad regulation. For example, in 2019, regulations in San Francisco nearly destroyed the legal practice of massage by making it prohibitively expensive. And we're talking $6,327 to get an initial license, and over $2,800 in yearly renewals. And to apply, you had to rent the space, but you couldn't open up until you got the permits, which could take months, meaning that you had to pay rent for up to 11 months on a place with no income. Think about that. And here's the takeaway. If the state or city charges you too little for that establishment license, they're not really interested in addressing human trafficking and prostitution. If they're serious about addressing this issue, then we run the risk of putting legally practicing massage therapists out of business, because the charges involved in getting that license are going to be prohibitively high. And the only people able to pay will be the larger practices like corporate massage businesses or the brothel owners. So what can we do instead?
So I'm going to stop there for just a moment to see if there are any questions about what I've talked about in terms of how important our language is and how we talk about this and how we define it.
All right, I just wanted to unmute my microphone really quick. That was a lot of really good information. It doesn't look like there's any questions right now. Julie and Emma are both watching. So do either of you have any questions about anything we've presented so far? Just kind of wait and see.
Yeah. Yeah, and while I'm waiting, it's just that it's so important for us to talk about and frame language so that way we're really starting that process of separating ourselves from the issue. I can't emphasize that enough. That's the first thing that we really have to do. And so since there are still aren't any other questions, let me go into the next part, which is about what we as massage therapists can do.
Let's go back to our eagle. Time to look at the big picture. First of all, develop and implement a Reclaim Our Name initiative. It's all about education to change our perception around the issue, which is what this talk is mostly about. Changing our language to reflect what's really going on, calling out those who are getting it wrong. Like, for example, the plumbing analogies have been my best tools for doing this. The second thing is to understand where these regulations are coming from. And that brings me to Polaris, an anti-trafficking organization. The vast majority of the establishment proposals come from people who are convinced that Polaris knows how to regulate massage businesses. So let's talk about them for a minute. As I said, Polaris is an anti-human trafficking group, and there are two important things to know about them. First, they released a report in 2018 with this cover page and title. The report includes information on how to regulate our profession. The second thing is that Polaris is classified as an NGO, a non-governmental organization, meaning that they're partly funded by the government. And why is this important? It means that they're tied into the federal response on human trafficking, and they are tied to the money aspects, so they have to justify how they get their money. And they have the money to start and participate in local and state human trafficking task forces. And over the years, they've developed lobbying chops to have a tremendous say in the issue of human trafficking. They're considered the experts. For example, if you've heard the phrase modern day slavery, that comes from Polaris. If you've heard the term illicit massage businesses, they claim in this report that they created the term. And if you've heard that there are 9,000 illicit massage businesses, to use their term, they're the ones who came up with that number. Now, let me give you some information about me before we go on. I actually supported establishment licensing at one time. I was on my state massage therapy board. I was a delegate to the Federation of State Massage Therapy Boards, the FSMTB. Most of you know them as the group in charge of MBLEX. It was around the time Oregon was putting in establishment licensing, and I became more convinced that it was the way to go. I didn't like it, but I thought it's the way to go. But later, I started seeing a language that I pointed out earlier, and that concerned me. And then a city official in a town across the state from me who founded one of these local task forces was trying to put establishment licensing into her town. And I was concerned on several fronts. It was poorly written, had too many loopholes, and had the type of language in it that I've been talking about. People in favor of it kept talking about this report from Polaris. So I thought maybe I should read the report to see what Polaris says. And first off, the name of the report concerned me, but I was going to reserve judgment here. The first half of the report merely gives background about human trafficking in general, so that didn't raise too many red flags for me. And then I got to the second half, which specifically addresses BDAMs, or what they call illicit massage businesses. And on that first page, page 45, Polaris talked about possible laws that could be enacted. And I see this. Such laws, quote, such laws might, for example, require the front door of the business to be unlocked and available for customer entry. This would have little or no negative effect on licensed massage therapists. That last part about how an unlocked door impacts massage therapists, you and I both know that this is no small thing. It is a huge safety issue. Red flag number one. But then it goes on massage therapists or their customers, but would serve as a deterrent to sex buyers who prefer more discreet side or rear entrances. Can you see the logic problem here? How does requiring a front door being unlocked make sex buyers want to use them rather than the side door that's also unlocked? They don't. And how do you know that sex buyers would be deterred? They don't. They don't offer any evidence on that, and that perked up my little critical antenna. And I saw quite a few more things in the report. One thing led to another, and I ended up writing a critical review of the report, which when it's all said and done, will be a series of articles. And this is the first one I've completed, a critical review. As part of this review, I looked to see if every endnote provided support for what was said in the paper. I followed the links and read all the articles available to me. And I found multiple examples where the citation did not support what it said in the paper. And that shocked me. And that led me to research every article and incidents mentioned in those endnotes to see if that's what really happened. Sometimes it wasn't. And ironically, that research led me to solutions that do work. I also researched Polaris and what the critics were saying about them, and I noted and researched why the national massage organizations didn't participate. And if you read the critique I wrote, you'll see that some of what Polaris says is suspect. For example, that number of BDAMs I talked about, that 9,000 number, I dissect that one and why that may not be accurate. I also look at what type of business they call a BDAM. That's how they define a BDAM, is suspect. And what they consider a shell company, which is one justification for establishment licensing, that's suspect too. And as a side note, this justification for establishment licensing went away. Remember that defense bill that Congress passed despite the presidential veto? Well, tucked into that defense bill, is a whole section containing provisions that get at this issue. So the whole justification of trying to uncover shell companies by establishment licensing, that goes away. And here's the most important thing that I found out. While Polaris advocates for establishment licensing, you'd think their sources, articles, and examples would back that up. It doesn't. Let me say that again. Polaris's own research included in their paper on BDAMs does not fully or adequately justify establishment licensing. For example, of the 34 independent incidents mentioned in the paper where an intervention took place, only 7 included establishment licensing code violations. If we only look at the second half of the paper that talks specifically about BDAMs, only 5 of the 19 interventions included establishment licensing code violations. That's not enough to justify imposing this regulatory scheme on us. 5 of 19, that's just a tad bit over 25%. As I said, working on this paper pointed me in the directions of what could be done. But before I get into that, I want to close out this section on Polaris by saying 2 things. Number one, I give props to Polaris for the work that they're doing on human trafficking. It is good work. But number two, that being said, Polaris is not our friend. They're the ones who coined that term illicit massage business, that term that creates that negative signaling for us. They're behind most of the establishment licensing laws being put forward, which, as I keep saying, ties us to the problem and makes us part of the problem rather than separating us from the problem. And yes, I do fault our national associations for not participating in writing the report, but I can hardly blame them because of the viewpoint that Polaris was taking. But the fault does lie squarely on Polaris because they went ahead with the paper anyway. And in my opinion, tried to imply in the paper that the associations participated when they didn't. I encourage you to make up your own mind about them, but before you do, I suggest reading the entire critique. Everything I've said about them in there is researched and footnoted. So, getting back to what we can do instead of establishment licensing. I provided some information on the source of these regulations, but we also need to know how to refute them. For example, here's one I run into a lot. Well, cosmetology businesses are regulated. We should be too. Massage therapists should be too. The response is, we're not cosmetologists. And if this is true in your state, you can also say that cosmetology inspectors are not allowed to come into a massage-only room located in that cosmetology business because it's a distinct profession, and the cosmetology inspectors have no jurisdiction. And if you're regulated as a healthcare profession, you can say that. Well, then they'll come back and say that medical facilities are regulated, so yours should be regulated. So go look that one up for your state to verify it. But in my state and in a lot of states, the offices of doctors, physical therapists, and other places where clients are seen are exempted from having to have those facility licenses. It says it in black and white specifically. So you can say that and assert that you should be treated like any other healthcare profession. Again, this is a topic that I could talk about for a while, so let's move on. It's also important to understand the political climate as to why these regulations tend to be accepted. Again, that's a big topic. And it's important to educate other LMTs about signaling. What I've been talking about here, because the biggest problem we have is that we testify against establishment licensing and against draconian regulations, and a legislator comes back and says, well, my massage therapist really didn't see anything wrong with it. This kind of stuff undermines and shoots us in the foot, so we can't work in a vacuum. We have to do an industry-wide education project about that. Basically, these last 2 points that I've made here are about combating the rhetoric and countering the perceptions. Again, all of these require a much deeper discussion than what we have time for here. So, this is part of the groundwork that has to be laid, the broad brush strokes before we tackle anything else of how we educate ourselves and others about the issues involved. And once we've done some of that, then we can move on to proposing actual legal remedies that work rather than.
Okay, so I'm pausing it again because mainly these are the things that we can do among ourselves. And there are other ideas of things that we can do for ourselves as well that don't take legal remedies or don't require legislative intervention. But anyway, I just wanted to stop again here to see if anybody else had any questions, or if Stephanie, you had comments or whatever.
I don't think so, not at this point. Anybody else have any questions? I'll wait and see if we get any response here.
So let me just talk for a minute to sort of lead into the next thing in case, while some other questions might be coming up. One of the things that we have to do in order to be able to fight these establishment licensing things to help separate us away from human trafficking and prostitution is that we just can't go in and fight these regulations. We need to be able to support and put forward other alternatives. And, I was raised with the idea when I was a kid, it's like, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. So I think it's really helpful for us to have in our arsenal a lot of different or potential ways of working with the problem and suggestions for working with the problem that deflect the focus from us. And that's what this next part is about. And since I'm not seeing any questions, I'm just going to go ahead and get into that. And that'll be our last segment.
Than just fighting what comes up. For example, there are proactive things that we can do or suggest. And the most successful intervention is landlord engagement. And there are two prongs to this strategy. Educate landlords about a lessee's activity and make them responsible for knowingly allowing it to happen on their properties. The premise here is that if a brothel has no place to go, if a B-dam has no place to go, they go away. And this has been successfully used all over the country. And in fact, an ally of Polaris, Hayward Research, had links to several stories about it in a newsletter they put out last year. And in this article that I'm referencing on the slide, they tout that this strategy can have a 75% success rate in shutting down B-dams. 75%. Not only that, the article said that it's the cheapest and easiest program to implement for local municipalities to enact. Let's contrast that with establishment licensing. In San Francisco, which I talked about earlier, from 2008 to 2013, they shut down 73 B-dams, but 45 of them reopened. That's a 62% failure rate. Think about it. A 75% success rate versus a 62% failure rate. That's a phenomenal difference. To implement the program for landlord education, law enforcement resources are needed to be able to go out to the sex websites to get that incriminating evidence of a business soliciting for sex and some other items as well. And for this to work, there'd have to be landlord laws in place that allows landlords to evict when there's suspected criminal activity, and laws that allow prosecution for landlords for aiding and abetting or harboring human trafficking and prostitution. But once they've been educated, now they know. This also means that the aiding and abetting and harboring laws need to be beefed up to include this provision, and with sentencing guidelines to ensure that no one convicted can materially participate, meaning that they can't own, manage, lease, be a landlord for, work in, or otherwise be connected to in this type of business or a related type of business for at least 10 years. San Francisco did this. The next set of laws to beef up on state and local level are public nuisance laws. These laws are how a city can force someone to get rid of junk cars on their properties, but they can do so much more. This means that declaring any location where human trafficking and prostitution occurs is a public nuisance. These laws are enacted on the city and county level too. Such a law would have to ensure that the nuisance can be abated, another word for destroyed, by being shut down for at least a year and all fixtures in the building that contributed to the nuisance sold off. Everything in there that's not nailed down, massage tables, chairs, desks, anything removable, sold off. If an official tells you that it's only a misdemeanor crime, look through your statutes and ordinances, the state and local laws. Most of the time, abating or destroying a nuisance can be ordered by a judge, and the sentencing guidelines for having a public nuisance can mirror the sentencing guidelines that I talked about before. This is also something landlords can be accountable for too, that they can be prosecuted under these laws. Another type of law that can be utilized to combat these businesses are code enforcement laws. That's actually what establishment licensing on a local level is. It's a zoning or code enforcement, but you can use other codes. Most cities allow for reasonable inspections, and they're not using this provision. For example, a fire code inspector typically goes in when you get a city license. They can inspect every room, look at every outlet. If a city allows for reasonable inspection, a fire code inspector could regularly inspect a business, any business, and look for signs of human trafficking. When they find something, they can get law enforcement involved. Let me give you a couple of examples. Tacoma, Washington used electrical and construction codes to shut down B-dams. These B-dams put up walls and made rooms without permits. That's a safety issue. In St. James, New York, they also used fire and building codes. And in Brooklyn, New York, They used building codes, but they also used worker compensation laws because the traffickers didn't pay workers' compensation. Remember, they didn't get Al Capone for being a mobster. They took him down using IRS codes. And the same can happen here. Failure to pay workers' comp, provide unemployment insurance, paying state withholding taxes, and so on. And yet another strategy is to revise adult entertainment or sexually oriented business codes so that any business acting as an AE or SO is classified as one, whether or not they have that license or permit or whether or not they call themselves one. Then what you do is you prohibit massage therapy, or any action that meets the definition of massage or massage therapy. Then when a BDAM is busted, they'd be cited under those codes rather than being cited under massage therapy codes, which puts more separation between us and them. Now, here's the beauty of what I just outlined here. All of these things can be enacted without implementing establishment licensing. And secondly, they can be enforced on any business where trafficking occurs. And they have been: hotels, restaurants, nail salons, anywhere sex or labor trafficking occurs. In short, these ideas go far beyond just that 6% of the human trafficking problem, meaning BDAMs, to spread a wider net. The whole point is to get the focus off of us and onto the problem as a whole. There are a ton more ideas, like defining and prohibiting dormitories in any commercially zoned area, and many more. Again, the idea is to put the focus elsewhere and make the point that we're not the problem, the criminals are. So there's a lot we can do. In closing, we have a lot of education to do, both inside and outside of our profession, and that includes us working on this issue as well. I hope that this information provided some of that today, and you gained a little bit more insight as to what we can do to combat this crime that's infiltrated our profession.
Okay, so I stopped the screen sharing and we're back.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I felt like there was just so much to cover that I really wanted to touch on those three areas of what we can do as a profession, what legal remedies we can suggest and push for, as well as the fact that how do we untangle ourselves from this issue, from human trafficking as well as prostitution? Because right now, I mean, you walk into a legislative room and they go, well, what do we call you? I mean, well, there's these massage parlors, and then there's, well, you know, and so we need to begin that process of really educating legislators as well as city officials and other people as well. So
yeah, so when we do that, let's talk about that really quick. So if we were to say we want to get together and try to change a city law that classifies us as an adult entertainment business, who do we talk to? Where do we go? Do we need to go to the city council? How do we bring that forward?
Well, again, these laws happen on city, county, and state levels. And so part of that is talking to the people who make the laws, which are either going to be a legislator who can bring that law forward for you on the state level, or a county commissioner type person, or a city council person. And so you have to go to the body that makes the laws. And that's where I was talking about the perception is so important, because what you're dealing with is it's a political process then. And so what's politically expedient for these folks? And when you look at the issue of human trafficking, everybody wants to help human trafficking, and yet human trafficking is very hard to prove. And so most of these cases are not really necessarily even human trafficking cases. The human trafficking cases are really interstate in nature and require multiple state jurisdictions versus something that's just a person in your local brothel or BDAM. And so part of that is getting the focus off of us as massage therapists and placing it on these places, and really saying that they are not us and we're separate from that, and using language and educating them how to do that. But it's something that gets talked about on both sides of the aisle, because everybody wants to help the victims of human trafficking. And you know, I've had people who work against human trafficking really get mad at me when I talk about us being a victim as well, because, oh, you're not getting raped. And it's like, well, but we are being made to pay for it.
Right.
You know, we're not a budgetary issue, because establishment licensing is used as a budgetary issue, because they don't have the funding, because they're cutting and cutting and cutting funding for law enforcement, whether it's on a state level or local level, because every time you hear the cry of, oh, we're paying too much taxes, we've got to cut taxes, that's one of the things that goes. And so then what they do is they say, well, how can we figure out a little bit of money to be able to deal with this? I know, we'll regulate massage therapists in order to fix this issue, but because of loopholes in the laws or various things, then what ends up happening is we practitioners end up paying for it, and the criminals continue doing what they're doing without really any abatement, because like you said earlier, Stephanie, they'll just reopen on the next corner. They've already figured out where they're going to go next. And that's why these landlord education laws are so important, is because when you educate landlords about who they're renting to, then they can get them out of there and they won't rent to them, and the problem goes away, or at least a part of the problem goes away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do we get landlords educated? Any ideas or suggestions on that?
Well, what you see for the formal projects is that it's law enforcement that's doing it. And so what they'll do is what they call landlord engagement or landlord education. And most of it is convincing landlords voluntarily to do something by providing them with information about human trafficking, talking about how these places happen, what a typical trafficking business looks like, and then providing them with evidence of, say, from one of these sex websites. And the sex websites themselves, getting rid of them is a little bit of a controversial thing, because people think, well, if we get rid of the sex websites, then the problem goes away. No, another sex website just pops up. And then what ends up happening is that some law enforcement actually like having them out there so that they can go and monitor these places and intervene and like rescue victims, because they've been able to see and track where these places are. So that's the other side of getting rid of these, the downside of getting rid of these places. But yes, the upside is we don't want them to be there by the same token. So by having law enforcement going out, gathering information about and evidence, then they can go to the landlord and educate the landlord. And implied underneath all of that is, we're educating you about this, and we want you to evict them. But there's a balance between trampling on people's rights versus looking at the thing, because if you compel a landlord to evict someone, they need to be able to do that legally. Okay, but how can we fix that? And that's where some of the realty laws come in, is that make it okay to evict someone if human trafficking is suspected on the premises, or if prostitution is suspected on the premises. And a lot of leases already have in there that landlords can evict for criminal activity taking place. So underneath all of this nice education is sort of an implicit threat of, well, now you know about these places, and if we have aiding and abetting laws or knowingly harboring because they're on their property, then we can go after the landlords too and hold them accountable. And that's one of the things that that's sort of the last resort aspect of it. But what law enforcement is finding, like, for example, in San Jose, Santa Clara County, Missouri just instituted a program, the Attorney General's office, I just saw something come through my email a couple of days ago, is that they're very successful using these landlord education type programs.
Okay. Well, good to know. And I guess the last question that I had, I just want to get your viewpoint on Florida, because I was looking at their requirements now. So now they're required to take a human trafficking course in
Mhm.
order to get their license renewal. They're also required to have a poster in their office, even in sole practitioners' offices, about human trafficking. And I just kind of wanted to get your opinion on that and see if you think that this is how it should be going forward in all states.
Yeah. Well, like for example, that ordinance that I was talking about in the state of Crossmas, they wanted us to wanted practitioners there to post a sign saying, well, we don't solicit for sex. And if you do, then we'll report you, which could be a safety issue. Because if a sex buyer comes in, sees that sign, and I'm saying I'm going to report you, then that can put me in potential danger. I think that educating for human trafficking is a really important thing. I'm not sure how effective those signs would be because I think where you would find them being posted, definitely for sure, are the BDAMs where they're trying to operate legally, because again, they have the resources and the money to be able to get the licensing, pay for the women to get some education or enough to be able to game the test to, get a fraudulent transcript or fraudulently pass the test, because there's ways to do that by studying keywords. You're seeing women who can't speak English passing the MBLEX. And that's the only way they can do that, is if they game the test. And so what you may also not find these signs in places that are operating under the radar, who are not legally operating. They're not going to have those signs in their businesses. And so then again, what that does is, for those of us who are legally practicing, who are legally doing the work, we're needing to put this information up in a public place. It's, if we're required to, then that's what we have to do. But I am not seeing how much good it does, except for those businesses that, because they're not going to necessarily show up in those businesses that really need to have them in there.
Right, right. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. But I hope you guys learned a lot, or at least a little bit of an introduction to what's going on in our field with human trafficking and how we can untangle and separate ourselves from this issue. At least on a local level, there are things that we know that we can do. So tomorrow you'll have the opportunity to join a pop-up Facebook group that I'm going to start, and it will probably be open for maybe 90 days. I'm going to say 90 days for now, and see if we get some good participation in it. And in that group, we can specifically discuss the issue of human trafficking and massage therapy and dive into this a little bit more. So I hope it'll be a place where we can learn more. We can get some input from massage therapists in different states, and find out what's going on in their specific situations, and kind of get a good overview of where the problem lies in our field and how we can start working towards solutions to fix this. So hopefully you'll join us there. Your input, your ideas, your solutions really matter. And we need you there. We need you to help us work towards solutions for our field. This is just one of many issues that we're planning on tackling this year. And then to invite others who might have interest in this topic into the group, so we can get as many massage therapists as possible involved in helping us try to come up with some solutions. So thank you for coming to our talk, and I hope that you learned a lot. And I wanted to encourage you to check out our website. So ours is usolmt.com. If you don't know about us, you'll find a lot more information there. And Deb's is lmtbodypolitic.com, right?
Yes, LMT Body Politic. And Stephanie, I just want to thank you for holding this forum and for inviting me to participate. I really appreciate it a whole lot. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here. And we're going to let everybody go. Have a good day, and we will talk to you again soon, and look out for that group tomorrow, okay? All right, thank you. Have a good day.